My name is Elias, and in the summer of 1908, when I was but 12 years old, my world was not the neatly tilled fields of our small Greek village, nor the azure expanse of the Aegean Sea that glittered on the horizon. No, my world was a dusty, sun-baked landscape of ancient bones and shattered rocks, a place where time itself seemed to unfold in layers, each revealing a story older than any myth whispered by the village elders. My father, Professor Nikolaos Petrakis, was not a man of the earth in the way of farmers, but a man of the earth's deep past, a paleontologist, a seeker of the truth buried beneath millennia of forgotten ages. Our village, Kalathea, was a sleepy cluster of whitewashed houses clinging to the hills of northern Greece. Life there was simple, marked by the rhythmic clang of the church bell, the bleating of goats on the rocky slopes, and the scent of olives and wild herbs baking under the relentless summer sun. Children chased chickens in the dust, women wove colorful tapestries, and men discussed the harvest in the shade of ancient fig trees. It was a world of living history, where the ruins of Roman villas and Byzantine churches were just part of the scenery. But for my father, and by extension, for me, the true history lay far, far deeper, in the very stones of the earth. My father was a quiet, intense man, with hands perpetually stained with the ochre of ancient soil and eyes that held the faraway glint of discovery. He spoke of millions of years as casually as other men spoke of last Tuesday. His passion was infectious, and from an early age I became his shadow, his apprentice in the grand, silent theater of the past. While other boys my age were learning to cast nets or tend vines, I was learning to distinguish sandstone from limestone, to carefully chip away at calcified earth, and to recognize the subtle curve of a fossilized tooth, the brittle outline of a prehistoric leaf. My playground was the ancient fossil beds that stretched for miles around our village, particularly the ones near the village of Ravin de la Pluie, a site known to geologists but barely known to the villagers themselves. The summer of 1908 was different. A tension hummed in the air, not unlike the buzz of cicadas, but deeper, more significant. For weeks, my father and his small team of local diggers had been meticulously excavating a new section of the fossil beds, a particularly rich seam of red clay that promised ancient secrets. The usual finds: mastodon teeth, ancient horse, bones, bits of fossilized turtles were exciting enough for a boy, but my father's excitement was building, a quiet storm brewing behind his perpetually dusty spectacles. He spoke in hushed tones of a hominoid possibility, a term that sent shivers of anticipation down my spine, even though I didn't fully grasp its weight. He believed he was on the verge of uncovering something truly extraordinary, a link to humanity's deepest past. I remember the day it happened with a clarity that time has never diminished. It was a sweltering July morning, the kind where the air shimmered above the rock, and even the lizards sought the deepest shadows. The dig site was a hive of slow, careful activity. Pickaxes chipped away at the stubborn earth, shovels scraped, and brushes meticulously swept away fine layers of dust, revealing the fragile imprints of bygone eras. My father was bent double over a freshly exposed section, his breath coming in short, excited gasps. I was nearby, sifting through a pile of loose sediment, when I heard his exclamation, a sharp, almost guttural sound that cut through the monotonous hum of the dig. "Elias! Come here! Quickly!" His voice was low, trembling with an emotion I rarely heard from him. I scrambled over the uneven terrain, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was kneeling, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound awe. He pointed a trembling finger at the exposed rock face. And there it was, not a complete skeleton, not even a skull, but something far more significant in its implication, a jawbone, Not just any jawbone, but a robust, primitive, human-like jawbone embedded in the ancient clay, its molars thick and distinctively shaped. It was different from anything we had found before, clearly not of any known ape or animal. It bore a striking, undeniable resemblance to human teeth, yet was unmistakably ancient, carrying the weight of millions of years. "Look, Elias," my father whispered, his voice barely audible. "The molars, the cusp patterns, the robust nature of the mandible. This is a hominoid, an early ancestor, perhaps, and judging by the stratigraphy, millions of years old, older than anything we dared hope for in this region." He spoke of Miocene epoch, of a time 6.5 million years ago, a number so vast it felt like another galaxy. My young mind struggled to fully grasp the enormity of the discovery, but I felt its power. The air around us seemed to vibrate with silent awe. This wasn't just a bone. It was a fragment of the very beginning, a lost piece of the human story. My father carefully, meticulously, began to excavate around the jawbone, using tiny brushes and dental picks, his movements precise and reverent. The entire team gathered, their usual chatter silenced, their faces etched with a shared sense of wonder. Over the next few weeks, the excavation became an intense, almost feverish pursuit. More fragments emerged from the stubborn clay. A few, more teeth, pieces of a facial bone, a part of a cranium. Each discovery was treated with the reverence of a holy relic. My father, working late into the night by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, sketched and measured, consulted his thick textbooks, and wrote endless notes in his journal, his theories slowly, meticulously forming. The implications of the find were colossal. At that time, in the early 20th century, the prevailing scientific belief placed the origins of humanity firmly in Africa. A hominoid fossil of such immense age, found in Europe, specifically in Greece, was not just unexpected. It was revolutionary. It challenged established theories, shook the very foundations of accepted paleoanthropology. My father, though meticulous and cautious by nature, knew the weight of what he had found. He tentatively named the creature Ouranopithecus macedoniensis, Ouranopithecus meaning ancient ape from Ouranos, sky, or celestial ape, a nod to the ancient Greek god of the sky, reflecting its ancient, almost mythical age and the vastness of time it represented, and Macedoniensis for the region of Macedonia, where it was found. The name itself felt grand, echoing the profound significance of the discovery. But with discovery came controversy. My father's initial communications to the scientific community, cautious and meticulously detailed as they were met with skepticism, even outright dismissal by some. How could a hominoid of 6.5 million years old be found in Europe? It contradicted everything they believed. Letters arrived at our small village, filled with polite doubts, academic critiques, and sometimes thinly veiled accusations of misidentification or even fabrication. The established scholars, those at the prestigious universities in London and Paris, clung fiercely to their existing theories, unwilling to consider a paradigm shift. My father, though disheartened by the resistance, was not deterred. He had the fossil, the irrefutable evidence. He worked tirelessly, sketching, analyzing, comparing. He often let me help, carefully cleaning fragments, organizing his notes. I learned to distinguish the subtle nuances of bone structure, the fine lines that separated one species from another. I saw the passion in his eyes, the unwavering conviction that he held a piece of vital truth in his hands, even if the world wasn't yet ready to believe him. "Science is not always about what is convenient, Elias," he would say, peering at a molar through his magnifying glass. "It is about what the evidence tells you. And this bone tells a very old, very important story. A story of a lost ancestor, perhaps." The skepticism from the established scientific community slowly began to harden into outright opposition. Some prominent figures wrote scathing articles in scientific journals, dismissing Ouranopithecus as merely an aberrant ape, not a hominoid. They argued about the cusp patterns, the robusticity of the jaw, finding every minute detail to discredit the find, and by extension, my father's work. The lack of a complete skull or postcranial skeleton meant my father's arguments, though strong, were incomplete, leaving room for doubt. My father, though a man of science, was also a man of profound integrity. He invited skeptical colleagues to the dig site, offered full access to the fossils, and patiently explained his reasoning. A few came, their faces initially dismissive, but many left with a flicker of intrigue in their eyes, if not full conviction. But the dominant voices, those with the most influence, remained unmoved. The out-of-Africa theory was too entrenched, too comforting in its simplicity. As the summer waned and the threat of the autumn rains loomed, the excavation had to be temporarily halted. The most significant pieces of Ouranopithecus, the jawbone, the teeth, the cranial fragments, were carefully packed in plaster, awaiting transport to Athens for further study and, hopefully, presentation to a wider, more accepting scientific audience. My father, though tired, was resolute. He knew the fight was far from over. I watched him, my small heart filled with a fierce loyalty. I didn't fully grasp the complex scientific debates, but I understood the unfairness of it. My father had found something incredible, something that proved how little we truly knew about our own beginnings. And yet the world was unwilling to listen. The autumn winds brought not only the chill of the coming winter, but also a new, more biting coldness from the scientific world. The carefully packed fossils of Ouranopithecus, shrouded in plaster and hope, were transported to Athens, destined for the university laboratories and, we hoped, a wider, more accepting audience. My father, Professor Nikolaos Petrakis, accompanied them, leaving me in the care of my mother in Calathea. It was the first time he had left for such an extended period since the dig began, and his absence hung heavy in our small house, palpable as the dust from the fossil beds. Life in the village tried to return to its predictable rhythms, but for me, nothing felt the same. The very ground beneath my feet seemed to hum with the knowledge of ancient times. I would spend hours walking the perimeter of the now-closed dig site, imagining the world 6.5 million years ago. A vast subtropical forest teeming with life, where mastodons roamed and these ancient, human-like creatures, the Ouranopithecus, perhaps climbed trees and foraged for fruit. My mind, fueled by my father's quiet lessons, conjured vivid images of a world long lost, a world where our distant ancestors, those whose jawbones and teeth we had unearthed, lived and thrived. My father's letters arrived sporadically, each, one eagerly anticipated and read aloud to my mother by the flickering light of the evening lamp. At first, they were filled with cautious optimism. He described the meticulous cleaning and analysis of the fossils in the university labs, the careful casting of duplicates for study, and the preparations for his formal presentation to the scientific community in Athens. He spoke of the precise measurements of the molars, the robusticity of the jaw, and how these features strongly aligned Ouranopithecus with the lineage leading to humans, rather than to the great apes. He recounted the detailed stratigraphy of the Ravin de la Pluie site, showing beyond doubt the immense age of the fossil. But then the tone of his letters began to shift, growing heavier, tinged with a weariness that seeped through the neat handwriting. The skepticism from the established scientific community in Europe, which had been a low hum, was now a louder, more insistent chorus. They cling to their African narrative with a tenacity that defies reason, Elias, he wrote in one letter, his frustration evident even on paper. They refuse to acknowledge the possibility of a European ancestor despite the overwhelming evidence. It is not science they defend, but a comfort, a settled understanding they are loath to disrupt. The renowned paleontologists from London, from Paris, from Berlin, figures my father had once revered, became his most vocal critics. They dismissed Ouranopithecus as a mere large-bodied ape, perhaps related to other Miocene apes found in Europe, but certainly not a hominoid. They picked apart every minute detail of his findings: the angle of a tooth cusp, the thickness of a bone, the precise layer of clay from which it was extracted. They argued that the jawbone's robust features were simply an adaptation to a tough diet, not an indicator of a human lineage. They claimed the resemblance to human teeth was a coincidence, a trick of convergent evolution. My father, in his letters, recounted the debates, the long, arduous hours spent defending his meticulous work against what felt like a tide of entrenched dogma. He spoke of polite but firm rejections from prestigious journals, of invitations to conferences being withdrawn, of scholarly committees refusing to even consider Ouranopithecus as a valid hominoid. It was a disheartening period, a relentless, intellectual battle that took its toll on him. He, a man whose life was dedicated to uncovering truth, found himself facing a scientific establishment seemingly unwilling to consider new evidence that contradicted their long-held beliefs. "It is not merely a matter of scientific debate, Elias," he penned in a particularly somber letter, "but a resistance to a new story of ourselves. The idea that humanity's lineage might have roots stretching across continents, rather than solely from one cradle, is unsettling to them. It forces a re-evaluation, a humility about our certainties, and such humility, alas, is often resisted most fiercely by those who claim to seek knowledge. I understood the unfairness of it. My father, who lived and breathed the past, who approached every fossil with the reverence it deserved, was being dismissed, his integrity questioned. My small heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness. I wanted to be there, to stand beside him, to shout from the rooftops about the undeniable truth of that ancient jawbone, the profound story etched into its very structure. One day a package arrived from Athens. It was small, carefully wrapped, and contained not a letter but a plaster cast. I carefully peeled back the paper, and there it was, a perfect replica of the Ouranopithecus jawbone. It lay in my palm, heavy and smooth, its distinctive molars staring up at me. It felt like holding a piece of deep time, a tangible link to 6.5 million years ago. My father had sent it to me. It was his silent message, a reminder of the truth he fought for, a piece of the ancestor he had found. I kept the cast hidden in my room, under my bed, a secret treasure. I would take it out sometimes, turning it over in my hands, tracing the robust curve of the mandible, running my finger over the cusps of the molars. I would compare it to my own jaw, to the bones of the domestic animals in our village, to the illustrations in my father's textbooks, and each time, the resemblance, the undeniable hominoid characteristics became clearer to me, even with my young, untrained eye. It was not an ape. It was something more. It was a bridge. As winter deepened, and the threat of severe weather made travel to Athens impossible, my father returned to Calathea. He looked thinner, his face more deeply lined, his shoulders stooped, with a weariness that went beyond physical exertion. But in his eyes, despite the fatigue, there was still that unwavering spark of conviction. He carried a stack of new letters, newspaper clippings, and rejected journal submissions. The scientific world, for the most part, remained unconvinced. "They call it an aberrant ape, Elias," he said one evening, his voice flat as he tossed a particularly scathing article onto the table. "They say its teeth are merely specialized for a diet of hard nuts, nothing more. That its jaw structure is robust only for chewing, not for supporting the kind of musculature a hominoid would possess for bipedalism, for speech." He sighed, running a hand through his sparse hair. "They demand a complete skull, a pelvis, foot bones. Anything to prove a bipedal stance, a larger brain. Without it, they say, it remains just an ape. The injustice of it festered in my young mind. How could they demand what the earth had not yet yielded? How could they dismiss such a profound discovery based on what was missing, rather than what was undeniably present? It was like judging a masterpiece by its incomplete outline. My father spent the winter months refining his arguments, sketching new diagrams, and planning for the next dig season. He believed there was more to be found at Ravin de la Pluie. He was convinced that somewhere, hidden deeper in the ancient clay, lay the proof that would silence his critics. A skull, perhaps, or the bones of a limb. Anything that would definitively establish Ouranopithecus as a true hominoid, a genuine ancestor of humanity. He taught me more about paleoanthropology, about the long, winding path of human evolution. He spoke of the different theories, the debates, the often fierce disagreements among scientists. He emphasized the importance of patience, of meticulous observation, and of unwavering belief in the evidence, even when it challenged the comfortable paradigms. "The earth does not lie, Elias," he would say, holding up a fossil fragment to the light. "It simply reveals its truths slowly, piece by painstaking piece, and sometimes it demands that we learn to listen with new ears and see with new eyes." As spring approached, bringing with it the scent of wild thyme and the promise of new excavations, my father's resolve hardened. He began making plans to return to Ravin de la Pluie, this time with a more ambitious plan, a larger team, and a deeper conviction that the earth held more secrets ready to be unearthed. He secured minimal funding, mostly from a few eccentric private patrons who, like him, held a deep fascination for the mysteries of human origins. The powerful academic institutions still largely turned their backs. I watched him, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew I would be by his side. The fight for Ouranopithecus was not just his. It was becoming mine, too. The world might call it an ape, a mere footnote in the grand story of evolution. But I held its jawbone in my hand, I had seen its teeth, and I knew with the unwavering certainty of a boy who had touched ancient history that Ouranopithecus Macedoniensis was something truly special. It was a lost ancestor, a forgotten branch on the vast tree of humanity, and we, my father and I, would prove it. The story of Ouranopithecus, humanity's deepest, most controversial ancestor, was about to enter its next, most crucial chapter, played out under the harsh Greek sun, amidst the unyielding ancient clay. Spring arrived in Calathea with a burst of color and scent, painting the hillsides with wild poppies and filling the air with the earthy perfume of awakened soil. For my father, Professor Nikolaos Petrakis, it brought not just the promise of new growth, but the renewed, burning conviction to return to Ravin de la Pluie. The winter had been a long, arduous intellectual battle, but it had only tempered his resolve, sharpening his focus. The constant barrage of skepticism from the established scientific community, their persistent dismissal of Ouranopithecus as a mere ape, fueled his determination to find the irrefutable proof, the missing pieces that would silence their doubts. He spent weeks meticulously planning the next dig season. This would not be a small, cautious excavation. This would be a more ambitious undertaking, a deeper plunge into the ancient layers of the earth. He secured additional, albeit still modest, funding from a few independent patrons who, like him, possessed a genuine curiosity for the deeper mysteries of human origins rather than adherence to prevailing dogma. He hired more experienced local diggers, men whose hands were as weathered as the rock itself, and whose eyes had learned to discern the subtle nuances of buried stone. My father's vision was clear. They would focus on expanding the existing trench, digging deeper, wider, pushing through the stubbornly unyielding clay in the hope of reaching even older strata or uncovering more complete remains of Ouranopithecus. I was to be his constant companion, his shadow, as always. My 12-year-old heart swelled with pride and a fierce sense of purpose. I had spent the winter poring over his textbooks, studying the detailed diagrams of hominoid skulls and skeletons, memorizing the differences between the jaw structures of various primates. I would often take out the plaster cast of the Ouranopithecus jawbone, feeling its smooth, heavy presence in my hand, a silent promise of the truths yet to be unearthed. The injustice of my father's dismissal had solidified my own conviction. I truly believed in Ouranopithecus, in its unique place on the vast, sprawling tree of human ancestry. The return to Ravin de la Pluie was like a homecoming. The dig site, dormant through the winter, seemed to awaken with our arrival, humming with a renewed energy. The red clay, baked hard by the summer suns of millions of years ago, now yielded reluctantly to pickaxes and shovels. Days bled into weeks, marked by the rhythmic clang of tools, the grunts of exertion, and the whispered exclamations of discovery as new fragments emerged. We found more ancient horse bones, more fossilized deer antlers, more remnants of the Miocene, forest that once covered this land. Each find was carefully documented, cleaned, and catalogued, but our collective focus remained singularly fixed on Ouranopithecus. My father was relentless. He oversaw every section of the dig, his eyes sharp, missing nothing. He taught me how to recognize the subtle changes in soil composition, the slight shifts in color that could indicate a different geological layer, a different epoch of time. He showed me how to use the delicate dental picks to carefully scrape away sediment from fragile bone, how to apply plaster casts with a surgeon's precision. I was no longer just his shadow. I was becoming an extension of his will, my hands learning the silent language of the ancient earth. The heat of the Greek summer soon descended upon us, relentless and unforgiving. The sun beat down, turning the clay to a brick-like hardness, forcing us to start work before dawn and seek refuge in the shade during the hottest parts of the day. Water was precious, our skin perpetually coated in a fine reddish dust, but the discomfort was a small price to pay for the exhilaration of the hunt, for the possibility of touching something truly ancient. Midsummer, after weeks of painstaking work and countless minor discoveries, my father's attention became increasingly focused on a particular section of the trench. It was a layer of very dense, dark clay, almost black in color, deeper than we had ever excavated before at this site. He believed it held the key to a more complete Ouranopithecus specimen. The air around him seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of nearing a profound moment. One scorching afternoon, as the cicadas buzzed with a hypnotic intensity, my father let out a sharp, indrawn breath. He was kneeling, as he had been that first day, his face streaked with sweat, his eyes wide. I scrambled to his side, my heart leaping with anticipation. He pointed, his finger trembling slightly, and there, embedded in the dark, dense clay, was a curve of bone far larger than anything we had found before. It was not a jawbone. It was, unmistakably, profoundly, a piece of a cranium. A large, robust piece of a skull, almost black against the dark clay. It was fossilized, heavy, and intricately structured. My father's hands, usually so steady, shook slightly as he began to meticulously clear the earth around it. The diggers, sensing the magnitude of the find, fell silent, watching with bated breath. "A skull, Elias," my father whispered, his voice thick with emotion, barely audible. "We have a skull, or at least a significant portion of one." He ran his hand reverently over the exposed bone. The supraorbital torus, the post-orbital constriction, the nuchal crest. It's robust, even more so than the jaw suggested. But the general shape, the proportions, it's undeniably hominoid. Not an ape, Elias. Not merely an ape. The discovery of a cranial fragment was a monumental step, While not a complete skull, it offered invaluable insights into brain size and structure, facial features, and the arrangement of muscles and attachment points. It was a piece of evidence that the skeptics had demanded, a tangible answer to their persistent doubts. This was the proof my father had tirelessly sought, the key to unlocking Ouranopithecus's true place in the family tree. The meticulous excavation of the skull fragment took days. Every speck of clay was removed with the utmost care. Every minute. Detail recorded. As more of the cranium was exposed, its features became clearer, reinforcing my father's conviction. It showed characteristics that distinguished it from known apes of the Miocene epoch, hinting at a more upright posture, a different kind of life. My father spent every evening that followed hunched over his makeshift drawing board, meticulously, sketching the contours of the skull, comparing it to diagrams of Homo erectus, of Neanderthals, of various apes. He discovered features that suggested a brain size larger than typical apes of its time, though still small by modern human standards. He analyzed the attachment points for neck muscles, finding subtle indications of an erect or semi-erect posture, further supporting the hominoid lineage. He was radiating a quiet triumph, a profound vindication. He drafted new letters, this time filled with a renewed sense of confidence, sending detailed diagrams and photographs of the cranial fragment to his most vocal critics. The responses, when they came, were still cautious, but there was a distinct shift in tone. The outright dismissals lessened, replaced by expressions of guarded interest and the need for further study. A few even acknowledged the provocative nature of the find. It was not full acceptance, not yet, but it was a crack in the formidable wall of skepticism. "They cannot deny a skull, Elias," my father said to me one evening, his eyes shining with a quiet triumph as he held the newly cast replica of the cranial fragment. "It is far more difficult to argue against such evidence. It forces them to reconsider their fixed beliefs. The earth speaks, and they must listen." The discovery brought a small influx of new scientific interest. A few younger, more open-minded, paleontologists and anthropologists traveled to Calathea, drawn by the undeniable significance of the cranial fragment. They studied the fossil, examined the dig site, and spent hours in intense, respectful debate with my father. Their questions were keen, their observations insightful, and their willingness to consider new evidence was a breath of fresh air. They still had questions, still saw ambiguities, but they engaged with the evidence rather than simply dismissing it. One of these visiting scholars, a young, earnest anthropologist named Dr. Alara Vance, was particularly taken by my father's work. She spent weeks at the dig site, meticulous in her own observations, and hours discussing theories with my father. She even took the time to explain some of the more complex scientific arguments to me, treating me not just as a boy, but as a fellow inquirer. Her presence brought a new dynamism to the remote dig site, a sense of shared scientific passion that energized my father. "She understands, Elias," my father confided in me one evening, watching Dr. Vance as she carefully cataloged samples. "She is not afraid to challenge what she has been taught if the evidence demands it. That is the true spirit of science." As the summer drew to a close and the dig season had to be suspended once more, the Ouranopithecus collection had grown significantly. We now had a remarkably complete jawbone, a substantial portion of a cranium, and several other fragmented bones, all meticulously documented and cared for. The proof was accumulating, piece by undeniable piece. My father, though still facing an uphill battle against deeply entrenched beliefs, returned to Athens with a renewed sense of hope and a fortified arsenal of evidence. The fight for Ouranopithecus was far from over, but the discovery of the cranial fragment had changed the tide. It had forced a reevaluation, a crack in the wall of skepticism. And I, Elias, had been there. I had seen it unearthed, had held its ancient contours in my hand. The following year brought a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper delve into the ancient earth of Ravin de la Pluie. My father, Professor Nikolaos Petrakis, returned to Calathea with a quiet determination that belied the immense scientific and financial challenges he faced. The crack in the wall of skepticism that the cranial fragment had created was just that, a crack, not a gaping hole. While some younger, more open-minded scholars like Dr. Ilara Vance showed genuine interest, the prevailing academic currents still flowed against him. Funding remained scarce, reliant on the generosity of a few visionary private patrons who trusted his instinct more than established dogma. Yet my father was undeterred. The earth, he believed, held more truths to reveal, and he was determined to listen. This dig season was even more ambitious. My father's plan was audacious, to systematically expand the entire trench, creating a larger, more expansive window into the Miocene epoch. He wanted to uncover a more complete skeleton, to find the post-cranial remains, a pelvis, limb, bones, foot bones, that would definitively prove Ouranopithecus's bipedal nature, its ability to walk upright, the hallmark trait that separated hominoids from other apes. This was the ultimate challenge posed by his critics, and he intended to meet it head-on. I was no longer just a boy trailing his father. I was a vital, if young, member of the team. My hands, once clumsy, now moved with a nascent expertise. I could identify bone fragments with increasing accuracy, differentiate between the subtle shades of clay that marked different geological layers, and assist with the delicate plaster casting of fragile specimens. My father continued to teach, me, patiently explaining the nuances of stratigraphy, the complex morphology of fossilized remains, and the grand winding narrative of evolutionary theory. He treated me not as a child, but as a fellow scientist, an eager student in the vast classroom of the Earth's history. The summer was brutal. The sun beat down with relentless intensity, baking the exposed clay to a hardness that resisted even the sharpest picks. Dust, fine and red, coated everything, clinging to our skin, our clothes, our very breath. Water was a constant, precious commodity, brought up from the village in heavy ceramic jars. Days began before the first hint of dawn, ending only when the oppressive heat became unbearable, forcing us into the meager shade of canvas tarpaulins. The physical toll was immense, but the shared purpose, the silent anticipation of discovery, fueled us. We worked through layers that held a dizzying array of life from millions of years ago. We uncovered fossilized leaves, remnants of the lush subtropical forests that once graced these hills. We found teeth from ancient deer, smaller and more primitive than those known today, suggesting a diverse ecosystem. We meticulously cleaned and cataloged fragments of enormous mastodon tusks, imagining the colossal creatures that once lumbered through this very landscape. Each discovery, though not Ouranopithecus, was a piece of the ancient puzzle, fleshing out the environment in which our potential ancestor lived. My father, ever vigilant, focused his attention on the lowest, oldest stratum of the expanded trench. He believed that if more complete remains existed, they would be buried deeper, preserved in the most ancient layers of the clay. He personally oversaw the excavation of this section, working with a painstaking slowness that bordered on reverence, his eyes constantly scanning, his breath often held. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The mounting pressure was palpable. The meager funds were dwindling. The critics, though quieter, still loomed, and the most significant piece of the puzzle, the definitive proof, remained elusive. Doubt, like a creeping vine, began to subtly wrap itself around the edges of our hope. Even my father, usually so stoic, sometimes showed flashes of weariness, a deep sigh as he looked out over the empty trench at sunset. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, a new sound cut through the monotonous hum of the cicadas. It wasn't my father's sharp exclamation this time. but a quiet, almost reverent murmur from one of the experienced diggers, an old man named Spiros, whose hands seemed to know the earth intimately. "Professor?" Spiros called, his voice low, his eyes wide. I think you need to see this." My father and I rushed to his side. Spiros was kneeling in the deepest part of the trench, his usually weathered face pale with a mixture of excitement and awe. He pointed a trembling finger, and there, revealed in the dark, dense clay, was something that made my heart leap into my throat. It was not a jawbone, nor a cranial fragment. It was a single, unmistakable femur, a thigh bone. And it was articulated, still connected, however subtly, to other smaller bones that seemed to form the very beginnings of a pelvis. This was it. This was the proof. A femur, particularly one, articulated with a pelvis, could offer definitive evidence of bipedalism. Its angle, its robusticity, the shape of its articulation points, all could reveal how its owner walked. My father dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he gently brushed away the surrounding clay. His eyes, usually so sharp, were now brimming with unshed tears. "A femur, Elias," he choked out, his voice thick with profound emotion. "And a pelvis. Partial, but there. O Ouranopithecus." His words were a whispered prayer, a quiet vindication. The meticulous excavation of these bones took days, conducted with an almost sacred care. Every grain of soil was carefully removed, every delicate ridge and curve of the bone documented. As more of the femur and pelvic fragments were exposed, their morphology became clearer, revealing features that strongly indicated an upright stance. The angle of the femoral neck, the shape of the ilium, all pointed towards a creature that walked on 2 legs, not 4. This was the irrefutable evidence, the definitive answer to the skeptic's most fundamental challenge. My father spent every evening that followed hunched over his makeshift drawing board, meticulously sketching the contours of the newly found bones. He compared them to diagrams of early hominins, of Australopithecines, of chimpanzees. He discovered features that were strikingly similar to later bipedal hominins, subtle indications of a gait that was uniquely human-like. He was radiating a profound triumph, a quiet joy that transcended all the previous months of doubt and dismissal. He drafted new letters, this time filled not just with confidence, but with an almost triumphant sense of completion. He sent detailed diagrams and photographs of the femur and pelvic fragments to every prominent paleontologist and anthropologist in Europe, to every prestigious journal that had previously rejected his work. He presented a comprehensive, irrefutable argument for Ouranopithecus's hominoid status, backed by all the accumulated evidence, the unique dental patterns of the jaw, the cranial features, and now the compelling evidence for bipedalism. The responses when they came were different this time. The caution remained, for science is slow to change, but the outright dismissals were gone. Expressions of profound interest, a need for immediate reevaluation, and a potentially revolutionary discovery flooded our small office. Invitations to conferences, previously withdrawn, were now reissued with urgency. Requests for plaster casts and detailed analyses poured in. The walls of skepticism, built by years of entrenched theory, were not just cracked. They were beginning to crumble. The news of the femur and pelvis of Ouranopithecus spread quickly through the international scientific community, first as whispers, then as urgent telegrams, finally breaking into the major newspapers of London, Paris, and Berlin. Headlines proclaimed, "Greek fossil challenges human origins," "New find rewrites history," and "Professor Petrakis vindicated." The fame, though belated, was immense. My father, once a dismissed provincial scholar, was now hailed as a groundbreaking visionary. Visiting scholars descended upon Calathea like a pilgrimage. Paleontologists, anthropologists, and geologists from across Europe and even America flocked. to the humble dig site. They studied the fossils, meticulously examined the stratigraphy, and engaged in intense, respectful debates with my father, their questions now born of genuine curiosity rather than predetermined dismissal. They still had a multitude of questions, still saw areas for further research, but the fundamental argument for Ouranopithecus as a hominoid was now undeniable. Dr. Ilara Vance, the young anthropologist who had shown early interest, returned to the dig site, her face alight with excitement. She collaborated closely with my father, her keen observations and sharp intellect proving invaluable. She spoke of the profound implications of Ouranopithecus, how it opened up the possibility of a more complex multi-regional origin for hominoids, how it suggested that the evolutionary path was not a simple straight line, but a vast, branching tree with unexpected roots and lost branches. "This is not just a discovery, Professor," she told my father one evening, her voice filled with awe as she looked at the Ouranopithecus remains laid out on a table in the makeshift laboratory. "This is a new chapter in the story of humanity, a profound awakening to how little we truly know about our own origins." As the summer drew to a close and the dig season had to be suspended once more due to the coming rains, the Ouranopithecus collection had become a remarkable testament to persistence and truth. The discovery of the femur and pelvic fragments of Ouranopithecus ignited a wildfire of interest across the globe. My father, Professor Nikolaos Petrakis, returned to Athens not just with fossils, but with an undeniable truth that reverberated through the scientific community. The cautious interest from previously skeptical scholars rapidly transformed into profound acknowledgement. Prestigious journals that had once rejected his papers now clamored for new submissions, while invitations to speak at international conferences poured in. The out-of-Africa theory, while still dominant for later human evolution, was forced to contend with the stunning possibility of a more complex, perhaps multi-regional origin for hominoids, with Greece as a potential ancient cradle. My father, once a dismissed provincial scholar, was now hailed as a visionary, his patience and unwavering belief in the evidence finally vindicated. I remained by his side throughout this whirlwind. In Athens, the university laboratories buzzed with activity. I watched as paleontologists and anthropologists from across Europe and America meticulously analyzed the Ouranopithecus remains, their initial skepticism replaced by fervent curiosity. The bones were treated with the utmost reverence, cleaned, preserved, and cast into perfect replicas for widespread study. My father's quiet triumph was palpable, and I felt immense pride witnessing his lifelong dedication finally being recognized on a global stage. The debates were no longer dismissive but earnest, focused on understanding the implications of this extraordinary 6.5-million-year-old ancestor. Dr. Ilara Vance, in particular, became a close collaborator, her sharp intellect and willingness to challenge existing paradigms proving invaluable as new theories emerged about Ouranopithecus's place in the vast, branching tree of life. The next major milestone was the public exhibition of Ouranopithecus at the Athens Museum of Natural History. It was a grand affair, drawing crowds from all walks of life. The fossils, carefully displayed, told a silent story of ancient life, of a creature that walked upright millions of years before conventional understanding. I remember standing beside my father, a young boy beaming with pride, watching people gaze in awe at the fragile bones. He spoke passionately about the discovery, about the long, winding path of human evolution, and the humbling truth that our past was far more intricate than we had imagined. The story of Ouranopithecus was no longer confined to scientific journals. It had captivated the imagination of the public, inspiring wonder and curiosity about humanity's deepest roots. It sparked conversations in homes and schools, forcing a broader reevaluation of our place in time. The legacy of Ouranopithecus was profound and enduring. It reshaped paleoanthropology, opening new avenues of research and encouraging a more flexible approach to understanding human evolution. The Ravin de la Pluie site became a cornerstone of Miocene hominoid studies, drawing researchers for decades to come. My father continued his work, though his battle shifted from proving the fossil's existence to thoroughly charting its complex implications. And I, Elias, grew up steeped in this extraordinary legacy. The ancient bones had not just been a scientific discovery. They had shaped the very course of my life. I went on to study paleoanthropology myself, driven by the same unwavering curiosity that had burned in my father's eyes. Years turned into decades. I followed in my father's footsteps, eventually leading my own expeditions, though none quite matched the singular impact of Ouranopithecus. My father, Professor Nicolaus Petrakis, lived a long, fulfilling life, revered in his field, a testament to the power of persistence against all odds. He would often speak of the day Spiros found the femur, his voice still filled with the same awe and emotion. He always reminded me, "The earth always tells its truth, Elias. Sometimes we just need to listen more carefully." Today, as an older man, I often return to the dusty, quiet corners of the Ravin de la Pluie site. I walk the ancient paths, feeling the sun-baked clay beneath my feet, and I remember that pivotal summer of 1908. I remember my father's trembling hand, the awe in his voice, the moment the femur emerged from the earth. Ouranopithecus macedoniensis stands tall in the scientific record, its existence undeniable, its place as a humanity's lost ancestor from 6.5 Maiae firmly established. It serves as a constant reminder of the vastness of time, the humility of discovery, and the never-ending wonder of our origins. Its story is a testament not only to a singular scientific find, but to the courage of a man who dared to challenge the known, and a boy who watched, learned, and carried that torch of truth forward. The earth had indeed spoken, and its profound, ancient whispers continue to resonate through the very fabric of who we are.